It's all gonna be good, don't worry about nothing.
Have you ever wished you could just, download a new skill straight into your brain? Yeah, we're not quite there yet, but science has found the next best thing. And it's basically a blueprint, a clear, evidence-based guide for learning way faster and better than you ever thought possible. So today, let's decode the science behind getting good at things fast.
I mean, we've all been there, right? You pick up a guitar, or you try to learn a new language, or maybe dive into coding, and you just hit a wall. It feels so slow, so frustrating, and sometimes it honestly feels impossible. So what gives? Why do our brains, these incredible learning machines, make the whole process feel like such an uphill battle?
Well, for decades, we've kind of been guessing, right? Relying on intuition, myths, and that whole learning styles thing. But what if I told you that scientists across neuroscience, psychology, you name it, have finally cracked the code? They've found the fundamental, non-negotiable rules your brain follows to learn any skill. And let me tell you, these rules, they're going to challenge a lot of what you think you know about learning.
All right, so let's get right into it. Think of these next 3 things as the laws of physics for your brain. They're not suggestions, okay? They're the absolute non-negotiable conditions for real, lasting learning to happen. And the cool part is, experts from totally different fields all landed on the same 3 rules.
Okay, rule number 1 is so simple, but it's a game changer. You cannot learn by just passively consuming information. It's not a spectator sport. Just watching a video or listening to a lecture or rereading a chapter over and over. Sorry, but it just doesn't cut it. Your brain has to be in the game, actively trying things out, making predictions, actually doing something.
The neuroscientist Stanislaus Dehaene put it perfectly. He said, a passive organism learns little or nothing. And this is really the core of what the psychologist Anders Ericsson famously called deliberate practice. It's the difference between just watching a tennis match versus being out on the court, laser-focused, hitting that same serve again and again and again. Your brain has to do the thing to learn the thing. It's that simple.
All right, this next rule completely flips our whole idea of failure on its head. We tend to think we learn when we get something right, but the science shows the exact opposite. Your brain fundamentally changes and rewires itself because of error signals. So a mistake isn't a failure, it's a critical piece of data. It's the GPS that tells your brain, whoops, that didn't work, time to adjust.
And this brings us to the 3rd and final rule. And this one busts one of the biggest myths in all of education. You are not a visual learner or an auditory learner. It's not just a thing. Research, like the work from Harold Pashler, has shown pretty definitively that these styles don't actually exist. The truth is, we all share a universal brain architecture. What works best depends on the content you're trying to learn, not the person learning it.
So there you have it, the 3 rules. Be active and embrace your mistakes. But what's actually happening inside your head when you do this? Let's pop the hood for a minute and look at the biological machinery that makes those aha moments happen.
This is where the real magic happens. When you get into that intense, focused effort, that deliberate practice, your brain releases a very specific chemical cocktail. One of these chemicals, acetylcholine, acts like a spotlight, sharpening your focus right on what you're doing. Another one, epinephrine, creates that feeling of alertness, maybe even a little bit of agitation or frustration. And the neuroscientist Andrew Huberman explains that this exact chemical state is what screams at your brain, hey, pay attention, this is important. Tag these neurons that are firing right now. We're going to change them later.
So here's the most important takeaway from all that chemistry. That feeling of frustration, that mental strain when you're really struggling with a problem, that's not a sign you're failing. That is the biological trigger for learning. It's literally the sound of the neuroplasticity engine firing up. You have to feel the strain to get the gain.
Okay, so that's the science. Awesome, right? But now let's get really practical. How do we translate all this biology into a clear set of do's and don'ts that you can start using like tonight? So take a second here and just think about how you usually study or practice something new. Are you a big rereader? Do you highlight everything? Do you cram the night before a test? Let's see if those old habits actually hold up against the science.
This chart really shows the shift we need to make. So, first, instead of worrying about your learning style, just combine words with relevant visuals. That's called dual coding, and it helps pretty much everyone. Next, and this is a big one, stop rereading your notes. It creates this false sense of confidence, what scientists call the illusion of fluency. Instead, close the book and force your brain to recall the information from scratch. That's retrieval practice, and it is way, way more powerful. And finally, yeah, you guessed it, Stop cramming. Spacing out your practice sessions over time is how you build real, long-term memory.
All right, now for a piece of the puzzle that almost everyone overlooks. We get so focused on the practice, on the hard work, but the science is crystal clear. What you do between your practice sessions is just as important. Rest isn't downtime. It's actually a critical phase of learning.
You see, the old view, coming from Erickson's work on experts, was that rest is just about passive recovery. You rest to avoid burnout so you can get back to practicing. But modern neuroscience shows us something way more amazing. During rest, and especially during sleep, your brain is not offline. It's actually entering one of its most active learning states. It's replaying, strengthening, and cementing everything you just struggled with. The actual rewiring, that happens when you stop.
But it's not just about getting a good night's sleep. What if I told you one of the most powerful learning hacks in the world takes only 10 seconds?
Okay, this is honestly one of the most incredible findings in learning science. Research that Huberman often highlights shows that if you just pause for about 10 seconds during an intense practice session, just stop and do nothing, your brain uses that tiny window to replay the neural sequence you were just practicing, but at 10 times the speed. These tiny little micro-rests can dramatically accelerate the whole learning process. It's wild.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the elephant in the room. What about talent? Is it really all just about practice, or are some people just, born with an advantage? The science here gets pretty interesting, and it's a debate that's still going on.
And this is a truly shocking finding. When researchers like Hambrick and McNamara looked at performance across all sorts of professions, they found that deliberate practice, while totally essential, only explained about 1% of the difference between performers. That means a whopping 99% of the difference comes from other things. That could be genetics, cognitive abilities, your motivation, even the age you start practicing.
So you basically have three key perspectives in this big debate. On one end, you have Erickson, who argue that expert performance is almost all about deliberate practice. On the other hand, you have Hambrick, who says, hey, practice is crucial, but genetics and other factors play a huge role. And then somewhere in the middle, you have Dehane, who has this more nuanced view. Our brains are incredibly plastic and can change, but we're not born as blank slates. We come with certain learning instincts already built in. The takeaway here? Practice is the most powerful tool you have, even if it's not the whole story.
Okay, so let's put this all together. Here is your new learning protocol, grounded in decades of solid research. First, practice by actively retrieving information, not passively rereading it. Second, space out your sessions and use those powerful 10-second microrests. Third, learn to embrace errors as the very engine of your learning. And finally, combine words and relevant visuals together, no matter what you think your style is.
The science is clear. The methods are proven. You now have the blueprint for how your brain is actually designed to learn. So the only question left is, now that you know how to build the skill, what are you going to build?
Nothing